Hello, welcome to MUNGAHSODE's Part 1. My name is Mungai Dennis, the Evangelical Poet. For those who are new here, you probably came to the channel because of spoken word, or you came to this channel because of particularly this episode. And I'm so glad you got to be with us on this episode. Feel most welcome. Uh, it's been a couple of years since I started doing spoken word. And by a couple of years, I'm not saying 2 years ago. I started doing spoken word in 2015. Writing poetry, I started in 2013. Back then, when I was in high school, and I had a lot on my mind and I wanted to express it. And poetry is how I expressed myself. And I'd like to share this about this first podcast for me. Uh, First of all, I'm nervous. The first 2 minutes of the first clip I shot for this episode, I just deleted them because I said totally nothing. And now I'm redoing these again. And for anyone who's trying to start something out there, it's not gonna be easy, but you just keep going. You just have to keep going at it until you do it. Yeah. Without out of the way, I would like to say that on Mungasods, I'm going to be sharing my wisdom according to the things that I'm learning in my life right now. And for most of it, I'll be doing it through explaining some of the bars I've written in the recent years or even in the current year. Yeah, so for those who've done the math, I started doing spoken word performances it's now the 8th year, like 7 years ago, and now this is the 8th year. And for writing, right now, by September, I'll be turning 10 years as a poet. And for me, that's an achievement, and I'm really grateful to God that I still have this gift of writing and expressing what's on my mind. Yeah. So, what does poetry mean to me? Poetry means to me, poetry for me is a tool for therapy, whether I like to admit it or not. From the word go, poetry for me was therapy. It is how I express myself when I'm anxious, when I'm happy, or when I have something on my mind that I don't really know how to put it in words by speech. And I feel like maybe if I write it down, I can explain it better. And that's what poetry is to me. And there are times I've tried writing articles on my blogs, and they ended up being more poetic than articles. And that's just me. Most of the things I do write end up rhyming, and rhyming is not one of my favorite things. It's just poetry has become a part of me so much that it's how I express myself even when I'm talking normally. Yeah. So what's poetry to me? Poetry is therapy. Uh, poetry for Poetry came in for me when I was in Form 3, and I was just about to sit for the exams that take me to Form 4. And back then in high school, we had named those exams River Mara. And if you Google one of the wonders of the world, I don't know whether it was really passed as a wonder of the world, is the migration of animals from Kenya to Tanzania and back, depending on the seasons. Yes. So you see wild beasts crossing into a river and then coming out on the other side as they head to Tanzania. And then after a couple of months, they come back to Kenya, depending on which side is drier and which side is wetter. Yes. So that exam was named after that river because not all the wild beasts make to get out of that water alive. Some of them break their limbs and they get stuck inside the water, and they end up being crocodile meals. Some of them are caught by crocodiles intentionally. So this one is neither wounded, but the crocodile goes after it and yeah, captures it. Yeah, so coming out on the other side and getting to Form 4 or that higher level in high school is is really tough in that school. I don't know whether it's still like that, but back then in high school it was really tough. And I didn't have a good background of passing my exams in Form 1 and Form 2. I can't lie about that. But in Form 3, I was really determined to make a difference in my life. And it was really freaking me out because I was going into uh, unknown territories and I was doing something new. I was risking, and I was not sure I was even gonna pass and go to Form 4. But I was really trusting in God that I was gonna do that. But that alone couldn't really make up for everything. So there's this day that the teacher came and announced that the first exams that we had done as opening for the exams have been cancelled and they will no longer matter in the end exams that will determine whether we will go to Form 4. So that means every one of us was going to start from scratch on building up on the points that are needed to go to Form 4. And that freaked me out. I was anxious. I was sweating. I was unable to talk. And then I remembered a saying I had on TV that uh, a writer once said that whatever you take a pen and a plain piece of paper and do with is what you are born to do. Like if you draw on that plain piece of paper, then that is what you were born to do. If you write, whatever you write on that piece of paper, that is what you were born to do. And for me, I met what I was born to do on that day. And for me, I wrote poetry. And interestingly, the reason I even wrote poetry had been inspired by some other background story in my life of where a friend of ours, or rather a classmate back in class 8, had been writing the things that have been bothering her mind on her diary. And one day the boys got hold of that diary and they read it aloud to the class. And those things were personal. We didn't have a right to know her thoughts, especially the thoughts in a diary. And I imagined if someone finds my writings in prose and reads them loud, and the way they were so personal and intimate for me. So I decided to write them in poetry form so that in case someone finds it, they wouldn't have the mind to decipher what was the meaning behind the poem. So poetry was how I wrote my diary, although I didn't have a diary back then. And it was how I expressed what I thought and also kept it secret from other people. And I started writing. And I can't tell you that I was compiling my poems. No, I didn't compile any poems. In fact, I was writing them on pieces of paper that I kept misplacing. And a friend of mine came across one of the papers and he was like, Yo, you could be a lyricist. You should compile these things. They make sense, they rhyme, and they have a deep meaning behind them. And I was like, Yo, this guy doesn't seem like the guys that really like me, but he's actually complimenting something that I've done, something that I do, and it felt so amazing. And from that day henceforth, I got a book where I would write my thoughts in poetry form and then compile them. And if I wrote them on the F4s, I would put them in a file. So while other people are filing exams so that they can pass the exams, personally was just filing my poems. And I kept losing them. But the good thing is I was still writing them. And that's how poetry started for me. And that's what poetry meant for me back then. It meant I could express my pain, my fears, my joy, and even the feelings I can't fathom. But then I got to campus. I was called to campus to do a course called statistics, and it's so mathematical for anyone who has experienced that or actuarial science. And that was another scary space. And it really made me write. I wrote a lot. And I wrote about girls that didn't like the idea of dating me. I wrote about I wrote about poetry being a lover for me because no one was willing to date me, or rather even have second thoughts about whether we could be something. So the only time people looked at me was not because of how I was dressed and how presentable I looked, but they looked at me when they heard me speak, when they heard me do poetry. That's the only time people looked at me. Back then, I didn't have swag, and poetry was all I had to my name. And in a way, it made people love the idea of Mungai the poet, or rather the evangelical poet, who was not even the evangelical poet by then, but they loved this guy that is so creative. But they never really met me, Mungai. Yeah, so that's poetry for me. That's how many years I've tried to put them as compiled as possible. It's only 2 years ago that I decided that I'm admitting that my poetry is therapeutic, Christian, and poetic, and spoken wordish, performative. Yeah, that's when I admitted that that's what it is to me. And I even raised the bar for myself on becoming the evangelical poet, put work on knowing the word of God so that I will be ministering what I'm doing and what I'm experiencing. And not just from a point of making people fanatic believers, but making people know the God I've known for myself. Yeah. So for me, poetry also means a sermon, just a short sermon, and a way that I express myself to the world in the shortest time possible. My name is Mungai, and this is MUNGAHSODE. Thank you for listening. May God bless you.